although there's less money in women's sport right now, if loads of people just decided they're going to go and watch it, then it would stop being the long-term option and it would start being the short-term option for companies, because they would be like, well, we can't make the argument that no one watches it anymore because loads of people are watching it. So then we have to put money into it because we're trying to capitalize on the sales. So if you're going to do one thing, in my mind, to like boost women's sport, just watch it. Just like tune in, like actually engage with it as it is now.
So,
one of my friends was telling me the other day, so his child had a birthday and he bought them an Afghan handbag, and she said, "Thanks for the bag, Dad."
I forgot that you do that.
Yeah, it's upsetting. Some weeks it's really good. Some weeks it's absolutely terrible. I mean that needed work. So welcome to the Performance Proposition. I'm Zab.
I'm Matt.
And today we have our first guest,
Emily.
So Emily is the owner of wemove.
Yes, you're going to be quite puzzled.
I know. Tell us a little bit about wemove.
So wemove stands for the Women's Empowerment Movement, which someone told me was quite strong as a name, and not in a good way, often when you say those things. It's not here to try and come and dismantle men in any way. It's just to empower women within the fitness space. So we work specifically with women to empower them in terms of knowledge and just encouragement to go on a health journey in any endeavour that looks like. So all women that are involved in it are obviously members, and we have a great community, and it's really leveled up my coaching experience as well. So it's just provided so much fulfillment having a company that has such an empowering niche and message.
Yeah, and you do coach men as well, don't you? You know, 'cause
yes.
Men can still empower women.
Absolutely.
As well, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I still coach men, and actually most of the time it tends to be men that want to join the woman in their life on their journey, because often you'll find that when a woman goes through a huge life change, they have a partner, you can often get this disconnect between who they once were and who they're going to be, and their partner will either come on that journey or they won't. And quite often I will have men that are involved in women's lives saying, hey, look, I've seen the change in that person and I want some of that too. So yes, whilst the majority of the community is focused on women, I still coach men individually.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
So because of what you do and the group that you work with, we thought it would be a really nice idea to have you on to talk a little bit about women's sport, especially because your background in football. So used to be a really high level football player.
High levelish.
kind of like all of us, really.
Yes.
I mean, I never did anything that I could
Matt would have been
level.
Matt would have been a high level sprinter or a high level football player if he lived closer to an athletic track or football pitch or rugby pitch.
My claim to fame is that I did get scouted by Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
Really?
And then I hurt my knee.
We've all got that story.
Couldn't. I mean, I had like it was like a rough underside of the kneecap. That's what the doctor said. Yeah. I feel like they just didn't understand what was going on, because it was just like I'd play a game of football and I wouldn't be able to walk for like 3 days. But you know, there you are.
Basically every personal trainer in the fitness industry has a story about the fact they were going to be a high level football player, basketball player, what have you, and then destroyed their knee, ankle,
Insert injury here.
Yeah.
I mean, given the percentage of people that play football and get scouted by football clubs and the amount that actually make it to elite football, I feel like there's a pretty strong chance, even if I hadn't hurt my knee, we'd still be having this conversation, and it would end with, I was in the Crystal Palace Academy and got dropped.
It's like 0.00001% or something like that. The stats is insane.
Yeah.
It's different for women though, I think. Like there is probably a higher percentage of a chance for you to be scouted, but then as a woman there was probably less of a chance for you to even be playing sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because opportunities are less. Funding historically has been shameful. Really. But yeah, I mean, that's what we're here to talk about today, really, isn't it? It's
So one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about it was I was speaking to my old basketball coach, and she was telling me about the fact that, because I used to play basketball and then I got injured, and as a result, never made it pro. Obviously, there was just
the NBA draft missed out.
just the injury and the minute lack of athleticism in every single regard. But yeah, we were talking about the fact that the London Lions female basketball team had won the European Cup for the first time ever. A British team in both male and female categories had won the Euro Cup, and then had their funding cut literally in that off season. And you're just like, okay, so you can be really, really successful as a team, have done something incredible, achieved something that no one else has ever achieved, done something historic, and still get your funding cut. And it just seemed like an opportune moment to maybe discuss the whole thing around how we fund female sport in the UK and across the world.
What was the justification for that?
It wasn't profitable enough. Right. So they had invested quite a lot of money. They pulled in quite a lot of talent from across the UK to the team, but they wanted to reinvest money in the men's side because there was more opportunity for profit there.
Wow.
Which, yeah.
I mean, that's the story across all sports, right? That's always the argument, is profitability. And that's the reason for pay gaps and lack of funding and investment and things like that. But the problem is that unless you get investment, you're never going to make profit. Yeah. And now, because sport is so expensive to play, because the fact you can make so much money from the men's game, there needs to be more investment in the women's game in order to get them to a point where they can even compete, right? So.
And I think there's always been this argument that it's not popular. That's always been the rebuttal, as well. We won't televise it because no one will watch it. And I think the women's football specifically, and I use women's football as an example mainly because they're probably the most watched sport for women's sport at the moment, definitely in the UK. And they have had astronomical viewers. Like, I think they have, I don't know the stats, but they had the most watched game that they've ever had at Emirates Stadium was a women's game recently. Yeah. They now sell out those stadiums regularly, having been told that you can't come into a stadium like this because you just wouldn't fill the seats and reaching max capacity. I've been stood at Wembley at the Euro Cup final, and there was 85,000-ish people there to watch this final, and we obviously won it, which was amazing. But nobody can now say, oh, it's just not popular. But that has been the rebuttal for so long. And I think women's football is starting to show that if you give it a platform, people will watch it.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, all you have to do is look at the sports where there's been investment and time, and the gaps between men and women are smaller in terms of things like athletics, I think, is one of the biggest examples.
Where there's less investment almost as well, though.
People will watch both sexes regardless because the standard is the same. You know, it's slightly different, but the competitiveness is the same. The gaps between athletes are the same. The feats they're performing are the same. And it's like, oh, so that's what happens when you just have equal investment in a thing. Like, the watchability goes up because, like we say, there's that disconnect between, oh, we're not investing in it because it's not profitable, because it's not watchable. But if we invested in it, it would become better and become more watchable and become more profitable.
Yep. So the issue, I'll be the bad guy in the conversation.
Oh dear.
So the question you then kind of have to ask yourself, right? Because the way that businesses work is obviously their primary responsibility is to the shareholder of the business, right? So if you then turn around and you go, okay, right, well, we can invest this much money in this side of the business, and possibly in 10 years' time, raise the state of play in that particular game, and as a result, everyone will become more profitable in that particular part of the business. Okay, so women's sport. Mm-hmm. Or we could just continue to invest money in the side of the sport where there's immediate profit. It's an easy option, or it's a much safer bet to put the money into men's sport at the moment. So then, where should that money come from? If historically we know that actually there's been an underfunding of women's sport at a grassroots level, elite sport, all the way up to elite sport level, should the money be coming from the people that own the elite sports teams, or should the money be coming from the state at a grassroots level and all of those national lottery contributions that go into elite sport? Should that then be channeled towards women's sport in order to make sure that it's not put on the shareholders and not put on the companies and not taking away from those company profits?
That's a hard one, because ultimately you're always going to be faced with the task of, do we go short term or do we go long term? And we always know that the immediate return of investment is the one that any human will favour because of science. Like, we're driven that way. I think it then just becomes down to moral obligation of what the morals of those companies are like. Unfortunately, at this point, it is if you have succeeded in business and you're at the top of the tree, you're probably a man with a lot of men around you. You have your own bias without even knowing it. So I don't think that for us to expect companies to just have a change of heart and do that is one that's going to happen. So do I think we should expect the state to pick up for that? To a certain degree, yes, because we know that there's inequality based on hundreds of years of inequality, and that is something that the government is there for, is to govern the people of today. Where would that money come from? Well, and also I guess the question is, does that mean we need to take away from the men to give to the women? And I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case, but there does need to be some equal spending from the state view to be able to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Although I don't think there's any football fan that would aggrieve you from slicing £100,000 per week off every single male player's salary in the Premier League and investing that into the women's game. I don't think there's any football fan out there. The only people that would be pissed are the players.
Yeah. And the managers and the owners.
Yeah. But, there's an obscene amount of money there, and I mean, it's so hard, isn't it, to reverse inflation? You can't really be like, oh, we've paid you this much for this many years, so we're going to pay you this much. Like you say, there's a difficult barrier to get over.
If the player is generating that much revenue for the club, because the men's game is generating a certain amount of revenue for the club.
Oh, but you know that there's players being paid that are not generating the revenue.
Players being paid.
Are we specifically talking about football here? Because I think this is another point, is it's also sport dependent.
Yeah.
Like this, for example, in this case, footballers get paid as a male perspective so much more than, say, like you said, athletics. So there isn't the conversation of, well, we'll just take it from them and put it there in that case, because they may not actually get enough funding themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting when you draw the distinction between football and athletics is, obviously, if you look at athletics and what's needed to train for athletics, normally you go to a group session. Normally that group session is on the same track as everybody else. You might see men and women at the same sessions. If they're not, they're still going to have similar access to coaching, to the space they need to train. They're still going to have the same access to gym work, etc. Whereas if you look at football or you look at basketball, and then you think about what court a basketball team is going to be allowed to train on. Are they going to be allowed to train on the main court? Are they going to be allowed to compete on that main stage? Are they going to have access to the same coaching staff, or are they going to get coaches that aren't necessarily as high level? Are they getting the same access to gym spaces? Are they playing at the same number of hours? Are they getting all of those things that you kind of have to look at across those two different sports? Like in one scenario, it's like everything's relatively even.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other, it's like everything's just completely skewed towards male sport, right?
We've got an issue, I think, as well, looking at football, where you've obviously got billionaires owning clubs. Like, it's not even a cap on who can own a club, it's billionaires. That the amount of money that obviously they're not allowed to make a net loss. That's the financial rules, isn't it, of Premier League football. If they then spend...
Unless they're Man City.
Unless they're Man City. But what is really frustrating about that is they then obviously just spend all their budget to buy new players in, which pushes the price up of players because there's so many billionaires. But then in order to not make a loss, the people who suffer are obviously the staff and maintenance people, and the people that actually make that club a club, they suffer. So in terms of the facilities and who gets trained where and all those sorts of things, the amount of money that has been pumped into some sports for men is just astronomical, to the point where I don't know how you stop that ball from rolling, because it seems like it's getting such momentum.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest, I think, examples for me in elite sport of the difference that a little bit of extra funding can make is rugby, and the dominance of the England women's team in rugby and the standard of the England's women's team. Like, you watch the England women's team play rugby, and it's like there's no argument can be made that these guys are less athletic, less aggressive. You know, the game is the same. Like, the kicks don't go quite as far, and there's other aspects of the game, but it's just a different game to watch, right? It's that's the only difference. But having worked at Wales and Scotland, I've seen firsthand the underfunding of the women's sides there and there. Like, you know, the women they'd have to come in last. They'd be prioritized below male academy players. Like, that's the level. And like, I remember one of the coaches, I won't say who, I won't say which union this was at, but basically complaining and saying they don't want it enough. Like, they're all out of shape. Like, what are they doing? And it's like, they're working full-time jobs, coming here after work, in the same way that, like, you know, some bloke who works at EY would go to a five-a-side football match after work. You know, like, that's the level that they're having to put in to just be able to access. And this is elite. This is like Scotland, Wales, women's national side. This is not club.
This is where you get that perpetual cycle as well then, because if you're having women, and I know this all too well because I played, so when I said I played-ish good football, I mean, I was what would the equivalent to men would be League One.
Yeah.
So that is 2 leagues below the Premier League. Like, I was having to train twice a week after my full-time job, and I would have to drive all across the country for my job. I was in sales. I'd come back, I'd have to train on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'd play on a Sunday. And all of our kit was under 18 boys, which don't fit women, by the way. We have a different figure to an underage boy. Under 18
Weirdly,
boy.
yeah.
Weirdly, yeah. We were expected to pay every time we played a game. We played at Southampton, and yet our game wasn't even in Southampton. Our home games were just slightly outside of, on a pitch that was genuinely banana shaped. And then we were having to, our nearest away game was Keynsham, which is 2 hours away, and I was going up to Forest Green Rovers and places like that. My whole day was gone, so I'm having to do that on top of working, on top of, and we know as personal trainers, meal prep, recovery, sleep. Yeah, it for me, it became too much of an investment for a payoff, because I ultimately could give my life up and still never get there. So you then have this kind of repeat cycle of, well, if we can't get women at their best, it doesn't become as watchable. We can't invest as much money into it because people don't want to see it. We don't have the elite standard there yet. We can't compete internationally, and therefore, back to your original point, are people going to pick that bet on that horse of, well, we'll put money in and then maybe in 10 years time we have a team that's going to win championships? Or do we actually just give an extra amount of funding into grassroots football for boys? I think it's really obvious in the boys question that they don't need more money, so they don't. Yeah. But there are sports out there that question becomes harder to answer, because both sides of the coin may be undervalued, but the difference in gender is still great. Yeah.
And one thing that I think is super interesting is, you know, recently BBC Sport have been really, really good for advertising and pushing the women's game and women's sport in general, right?
Brilliant.
And I mean, I speak from a place in that I know that I had a lot of bias, like a couple of years back, where not even like necessarily I didn't like women's sport, but like I just saw men's sport. That's what I watched. Like, I didn't go and actively seek out women's sport, right? And because it just wasn't on my mind.
Well, and also it wasn't as easy.
It wasn't as easy, yeah. But then, like now, like they'll just, and I think that's very clever of them, they'll put like a notification on the BBC Sport app and they'll say Man United are playing Arsenal tonight. And I'm like, oh, cool, I'll check that. And then you realise it's women's and you're like, okay, that's fine. I'll still watch that. But like, I wouldn't have gone to find that game, but they're putting it there and putting it. And to be honest with you, in the last year or so, the Women's Super League has just like rocketed in terms of how many people are talking about it. Because I think you just put it in people's faces, and they're like, "Oh, okay, no, I'll check that out." And then they check it out, and it's like, "Oh, the standard's actually quite high." That's contrary to what my internal bias was telling me that it would be. I'll engage in this.
So that kind of leads us on to the next unpopular question, and it's a question I get asked all the time: is there ever going to be a point where male and female sport is on the same level? So like right now, obviously we know there's a load of things that differentiate and potentially elevate the male side of sport, from increased funding, increased visibility, and as a result, increased training time, increased opportunity to compete, etc. If we do level the playing field, how close do we think the two sexes can get in terms of competition?
I don't think it'll be as long as we think, and because my initial thought was the planet will burn before that happens, like that, or we'll be in World War IV or whatever we're in. But mainly, actually, if I reflect on, and I can only give women's football as an example because I've played it, but I got goosebumps going into that Euro women's game when the final was on, because I'd actually gone to watch the last time England hosted an international competition. I think it might have even been the Euros. I was 14, and I don't think we even filled half a stand. So, and that was from and I'm now 32, so that's within 18 years. The difference.
I'm not necessarily just talking about the level of viewership. I'm talking more about the level of actual performance. So that's the question. So like, I've got former clients who are high-level squash players, former clients who've played tennis, and talk about so there's the argument about whether or not Serena Williams would win against the top 10 male players in a sport.
It's so much more than that though. Like, and this is why I was very careful when I said about the women's rugby. It's like, it's never going to be the same game because men have access to testosterone. There's that whole thing around athletes like Caster Semenya, and like there's a really difficult ethical question there that we won't get into. Yeah. But men have testosterone. Women don't have as much testosterone, and therefore testosterone, we know, is a performance enhancing drug and allows you to create higher levels of strength, higher levels of power, higher levels of endurance, higher levels of athleticism in general. And so you have to look at them as two separate things, and you have to look at, like, are these people competing at the top of their game for their sport? It's like you watch the women's 100 meters, you watch the men's 100 meters. Asking whether or not Usain Bolt would beat, what's the name of the Jamaican sprinter? I can't remember her name.
That's upsetting.
I can't remember most people's names.
I know all the British ones, but I just can't remember her. It's like the Shire.
Are you talking the Jamaican one, or are you talking the USA one with the?
No, she might be like Barbados. She might be something like. Either way, like
the fastest woman.
Yeah, the fastest versus her.
Yeah,
you're like,
but
it's not an argument.
Just to take a step back, we actually don't even know her name.
I know that's the thing,
and that's
right?
just reflective of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, we did. I realised that as I was saying.
Yeah, no, but that's the sad thing about it.
Yeah, you put them up against each other, and there's no question who's going to win. But the question is she like as athletic as she could be and running as fast as she could be for her gender in her sport? Yes, 100%. You watch the women's 100 meters; it is a great watch. Because they're all at the top of their game. They're running as fast as they can. They're running as hard as they can. It doesn't matter that it's a second longer than the men's because you're watching the same thing.
And you're never going to put them in a race with each other.
It's how close the competition is that makes it exciting. Right? Yeah. So yeah, no, I agree with that statement. I'm just more wondering. So do we think there is going to be a narrowing of that gap between those two sports, and how much do we think the narrowing of that gap is going to be? Because like, if you look at what's happened recently in terms of how many female fitness influencers you see online that are deadlifting outrageous weights, even by a male standard. How many women in the female side of the basketball community are now dunking? Like, it's unbelievable, like the level of improvement in performance that we're seeing just from a small amount of additional visibility and a small amount of additional investment. So do we think that it's going to narrow a lot. How much more exciting is that going to make the game? How much of an impact does all of that history have on the current discrepancy between how exciting we view the male game as being versus the female game?
It also comes down to what you're viewing as what part of the sport that you're looking at, right? So men are, for example, more physical, but women have a better pain threshold. You know, like there are differences in genders both ways. You know, it may be that darts, women actually completely excel the men long term if they like it, because they can focus more and keep their hands steady and, you know, regulate their emotions.
More likely better at ultra endurance events, right? Because of the fact they've got a higher pain threshold, because of the fact they've got better affinity to oxygen, they're better at utilising fat as an energy source, all of those things.
I think we're going to see a world where it'll be a blend, like they'll be great in their own right because you've got the exposure for more people to then get into it, but also you'll have options to watch all types of sport. And again, there'll be different games, just like volleyball's different to football and basketball. A woman's game will be different to the man's, and it's what type of game you like watching. Football, for example, is more skill-based. For women, you can't just hoof the ball up and crunch each other. It has to be a lot more on the floor. You have to pass a lot. But it doesn't mean that even that will excel as the years go on. It's just, it is a different game to watch.
It's a different game to watch. I mean, and I'm going to put my foot in my mouth again because I'm not sure I can remember her name. But the college sensation basketball player, I think it's Caitlin Hall. Is it something?
Yeah.
It's Caitlin Hall. Cool. I actually do know her name. Cool. But she had...
I don't know her name.
Yeah,
it's
I
even
haven't
more
no
embarrassing.
clue, which is embarrassing.
She had a 3-point contest with, you know, arguably the greatest 3-point shooter of all time in the men's game, Stephen Curry, right?
He doesn't know his name either, so that's fine. Steph
there
Curry.
You go. Well, there you go. I've messed it up both ways. Either way, they had a 3-point contest. Steph won, but like the gap was about the same as Steph versus like an equivalent men's player. Do you know what I mean? And that's the skill element of basketball. But she's never gonna beat, say, I don't know, Anthony Edwards in a dunking competition.
Absolutely not.
But so like the sports that lend themselves
impressed by
more
your
towards...
knowledge of
basketball
of names from different sports, man. Look at that.
I spend a lot of time on BBC Sport. When I find myself going through Instagram a bit too much, I just go on BBC Sport and I scroll through that a
different
bit.
Type of doom scroll.
Different type of doom scroll. Exactly. But yeah, sports that lend themselves more towards skill than just pure athleticism, you'll see like a real closing of the gap. Sports that lend themselves more towards pure athleticism, you won't see that same closing of the gap. But what you will see, I think, is an evolution of like, we just accept that that's what the women's version of the game looks like, and that's what the men's version of the game looks like. Like rugby, for example, different sports. Football, different sports, because there's such that blend of athleticism and skill. So you're never going to get the same game. And
that's the assumption that they all evenly get fed the investment, right?
Yeah.
So like this is in an ideal world where we just decide to give just money equally.
Invest money in women's sport right now up until everything is even. And
so in which case is like the earth will probably burn before that.
The thing is, it goes back further than that as well, right? We were talking about it just before we actually before we started filming, and we were talking about the fact that societally, the way that we treat women from a young age versus the way we treat men from a young age is completely different. So even that inhibits people's chances of getting into sport, inhibits people's chances of developing athleticism at a young age. All of those things that, like, if you see a 2-year-old boy running around in mud in his nice clothes, his parents are just like, yeah, fine, that's just Johnny being Johnny. But if you see a girl running around in a dress, it's a completely different story. If she gets a bit of mud on the dress, quite often you'll see parents shouting, telling their daughter off for getting messy. And it's like, if you have that at the age of 2, how that's going to impact athleticism at the age of 4, how that's going to impact your desire to participate in sport at the age of 6, 8, 10.
Yeah. And
all I was going to say is again, if you're not, your desire is based on what you've been told is good and bad, but also I do think a lot of desire comes down to your skill base, and I know, for example, that I never had an issue with any of those things because I don't know why. For some reason, I've always been given a ball at a young age. So I grew up until about 10 years old, not really realising how I was any different to the boys around me. I was playing football with them all since the age of 5. I got scouted for the men's Plymouth Argyle youth development team, I never was any different to them physically because I had that backing from my parents, the exposure to the sport, and also then everyone else around me told me I could. I was the only girl in the whole of Cornwall that played football with the boys, a whole county, and I was one. So think of how many women who would have been better than me had they got involved, had they had that. There's so many factors that led me to that point.
But then even that, it's like, okay, how many women could have potentially been better than you, but also how much would your opportunity to have developed been improved by the fact that more women were involved in sport?
Yeah.
Because once you go, okay, right, well, I'm the only person in Cornwall that plays football. I've got to travel all this way to actually make it to a training session and play for a team. If you've then got that that across the entire country, it's like, okay, well, how many teams can we actually play against? How easy is it to organise games between those teams to actually make sure that we're getting the opportunity to compete?
And recovery, right? Like, stick anyone in a car for like an hour each way. And I'm not joking, 3 or 4 times a week my dad would drive me an hour each way to go to my football.
Yeah.
Try and recover from that and eat and go to school. And then because you're the only girl, this is the other thing I found, and again, this is very anecdotal from my point of view, but I was then captain of the hockey team because we've got a girl that likes sport, and captain of netball. Don't know how to play netball, but here you go. And like, now volleyball, now this, now that, and I was ended up burnt. I suffered an overuse injury before I'd even hit 16 because I was just pushed into every direction because
there was no one else to do
no one else to take the heat as well. So yeah, I always think how far could I have got, but also would I have liked it as well? That's the other question.
I mean, interestingly, what you just said raised another point. Like I was there's so many points around this, right? I was gonna get into like just the attitudes of people, like even behind the money, you know, like men who look at women on social media lifting things and their egos and them not being able to deal with it and the barriers that faces. But I
Matt
think
sends me at least 10 memes a week of a man going through women's lifts and going through the comment sections from men.
Yeah.
He's a lad. He's great.
Yeah, link him in later.
We'll
link him in. But the point that I was actually going to make, because you made me think about it, was not just the discrepancy we have in terms of funding, in terms of access, but in our science and our understanding
100%.
of how to make women more athletic. You know, like all of the sports science we have up until about like the late 1990s is in men. It's in male participants. It's like we don't really understand how the menstrual cycle, like fully, like we're starting to, we don't understand how that impacts performance. We don't understand, like to a great degree, women and anterior cruciate ligament, you know, the fact that there's a huge higher prevalence of that in the women's game. And so we can't just use the same strategies that we've used for years with men in terms of training them and like lateral jumping training and stuff, because there's a higher risk of injury for women. And so we haven't just got this discrepancy from a funding and an access perspective, but we've also got
It's funny how we haven't got an understanding of the actual higher risk factors, like the higher risk factor of ACL injuries in women. But we still have a load of pseudoscience around the fact that women are more likely to get injured, or they're more likely to be brittle, or it's going to affect their sex hormones, or it's going to affect all sorts of...
The answer before was, well, they just can't do it then. And so that's why you had women's football was banned, because they said that it would cause... the reason they gave it was something like internal damage. Like your womb would just, I don't know, fall out of you or something. And whilst there is obviously... ACL injuries are a real thing. I mean, I'm suffering now, and I hate that. I'm now that statistic. But is it because women are more brittle, or is it because we've been putting them boots designed for men?
Yeah.
And so that's another element to it all. Is not only is do we have what we have is a data gap, and I urge anyone to go and read Invisible Women if they have no idea about that. It's a really good book to just show how we make all of our decisions based on data we've collected, but the data we've always collected has been biased, and that goes from that even skeletons that they found way back when we always assume are a male, and because it was a warrior, it therefore was a man. And a lot of science and research has been done on this one first human that they still don't know what the gender is. So There's a data gap,
yeah,
which feeds into all of it.
And you know, the whole like ACL thing, like I said, that's statistically women have a greater chance of ACL injury when playing X sports than men. And you're like, but if you looked at, say, I don't know, grassroots sport or sport where like people weren't physically prepared for the sport that they're doing because they didn't have the S&C, they didn't have the training, would you see an equivalence between men and women? Like, is that increased incidence of ACL injuries because there's a physiological difference or because there's a level of preparation for their sport difference?
Probably a combination of both, right? Because we know there is a physiological difference in terms of there's an increased Q angle at the knee, which increases the risk of injury.
Yeah, but like how big would that gap be?
How much smaller could we make that if we actually had proper S&C and had proper
understanding? And you know, that even leads us into the gym, which I know we've discussed before, that like the only actual piece of equipment in a gym that's designed for women is a weightlifting bar, and that's only because like they looked at it and there's the women-led company Eleco went, oh, this isn't okay to let women lift with a 20 kilo bar because it's too wide, the grip's too big for like the average woman's like hand, so it's just we're disadvantaging women. So I'm going to create this 15 kilo bar so that we can compete on a level playing field, and that's it. There's nothing else in the gym that's like specifically designed to bridge the gender gap.
And this is the frustration I have, because when I've brought this conversation up before, the conversation back is, well, a small man won't fit it either. I'm like, absolutely, you are correct. Just like a 15 kilo bar suits some men better.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we're saying, oh, women are really hard done by and small men don't have it bad. It's just saying that you need to develop equipment and practices and methodologies based on a variety of people, not just the average size wide cis male.
Yeah. Yep. Like assault bikes are a joke, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't fit on an assault bike.
Come to think of it, I've never seen you on an assault bike.
Every time I go on an assault bike, I have to lean right back so I don't hit myself in the ribs. It's
But yeah, I mean, you know, there's things that's just like, oh, we take the average height of a man, we take the average arm length of a man, it's just like we can't create equipment with that general level, you know, like the whole statistical, you know, phenomenon that X never exists, right?
Yeah.
In a population, the
average person will never you'll never find them, because
I didn't know.
Like
that.
statistically, that's the thing. If you take an average, the average does not exist anywhere in that population.
Interesting.
Which is mind blowing. But we're trying to create an environment based on that for people that sit there.
Yeah, and interesting, the gym is always, this is why, if we take it away from sport, because I think a lot of women, if you mention this and watching this, might go, oh, sport, hates it, PE, ugh. But they're not happy to go into a gym now because they don't have any of those biases and those things that they associate with going into the sport, but they're happy to exercise in a way that they can show physical prowess and skill and all those things that you can actually get from a sport, but there's no stigma to it. The fact that my business even exists is because similarly as issues with sport is we don't go in them, so they're not built for us, and therefore the less people you've got going into a gym that's female, you're going to have less coaches. The less coaches you have, the less owners you have, the less equipment owners you have, and it's almost like a complete pyramid of people who are not seeing the bigger picture because they have their own unconscious bias. And so it's funny that the only reason I have a business called the Women's Empowerment Movement is because and it's on my mission statement, is I want to change the fitness industry from the ground up. So if we can fill the gym with more females, we can then get more coaches, we can get more owners, we can get more equipment owners.
We can get more women being generally athletic and going, actually, I want to try a sport.
Yeah.
And then engaging in sport, you know, like I've started coaching this 23-year-old female. She came in, that there wasn't a bar small enough for her in the gym. So thankfully we've got a great, you know, gym ownership. I said to them, I was like, look, I haven't got a bar that's small enough for my client. I need like a 7.5 kilo training bar. And they bought it. But had I been in like a pure gym,
never would have happened.
A technique bar. But I was like, I need this because otherwise she's not going to be able to train. I can't, like, I was having to like lasso plates to a stick so that she could snatch because she couldn't snatch 15 bar
I wish I'd seen that.
Hey,
I mean, I'm glad it's no longer a thing, but
Yeah.
it would have been entertaining to see at least once.
I don't know. I have seen some people do some precarious things in our gym with sticks and some.
I mean,
plates.
yeah, but and people.
Yeah.
And people.
But yeah, I mean, you know, like that's the level we're talking about. Like you walk into a gym and it's like, well, I can't even access this sport. And she loves it now. She's like messaging me being like, when am I going to do my next comp? Like, can you do this weekend? Can you do this weekend? Because we've, you know, now we've had that entry level point and she's been able to snatch, and now she's on the 15 bar. Now she's like snatching 20 kilos easily. So it's like everything's off the floor, because that's another thing. They don't make change plates unless they're 2.5 kilos big.
Yeah.
So women can't practice, or even, you know, men who are, you know, not at that level physically, can't practice Olympic lifts off the floor.
Yeah.
If they're lifting less than 25 kilos or 20 kilos. And you're just like, why is this even a thing? Like, why haven't we solved this problem?
I think it's changing. That's something that I hold on to hope, though, is that
I mean,
I have seen
feels
great
like
change in the last 10 years. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah. I mean, like Zab said, I think one of the few things that social media is excellent for is picking these like incredible women athletes and just pushing them in our faces and being like, look at this.
Yeah.
Like I saw Olivia Reeves, who's a American weightlifter, squat 214 kilos the other day. I was like,
yeah.
Damn. Like, and it was like a picture perfect squat, and you're like it humbles you, and you realize it takes a lot of that internal bias that you might hold, that like men are just naturally always going to be more athletic than women. You're like, fuck no, there are so many women out there that are so much stronger than me, so much more powerful than me. And it just gets that idea out of your head. That's what's new. You want to say something?
No, it's exposure. Like,
yeah.
I'm trying to bring it back to the original point, which was, do we think that are we still on the gap one?
Yeah.
We go on tangents. I love this. But it coming from the grassroots level, it's all down to exposure. And so the very first question you asked when we got in here was, do people choose the short-term route of quick investment or the long-term? And it's like, if you were a betting man, actually, for me, the long-term investment is massive, what you can achieve with the untapped potential that is currently not invested in. Yeah. Like, you want to be investing in crypto years ago. You don't want to be doing it today. I would say it's similar to women's sport.
Yeah.
Because there aren't people who have the exposure. There's a lot more growth in that area. There's a lot more excitement, and the world is nicely but very slowly shifting that way.
I think it's just convincing someone to take the first step, right? Because as much as there's so much potential for growth, unless someone takes that first step, there's never the growth never happens. So investing, like getting one person to invest, if no one else is investing, then the league doesn't grow, because it's not exciting to watch one team do really well against a bunch of people that don't have any investment. That's why the Premier League's getting rubbish.
Ooh, 2 shots at Man City.
I feel I'm still hurting as an Everton fan. I'm still hurting about the fact that we've been given sanctions. And
I mean,
that is
surely that's not the biggest thing that's hurting you as an Everton fan.
I mean, that's what I'm blaming for my pain as an Everton fan. They'd have
done so many good things without that sanction.
They really would.
Do you know what?
They'd have finished like 17th.
Why are you an Everton fan?
Dad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You know that meme of Interstellar, where the dad's kind of traveling through space and looking back in time and seeing all the things that have happened over the course of life. And there's like one meme where it's basically like him giving his son an Everton shirt and him just screaming through this wall. And it's like, yeah.
That's you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not me. I don't let it affect me too much. I've just decided I don't care about football. But I am still going to be really pained by Man City and everything associated with football.
But coming back off that tangent.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. It's getting the first person to take a step. And I also think, like Em said, the smart investment is investing in women's sport at the moment, because historically, you know, and just to switch the argument a little bit for a second, you know, women are equally guilty of having internal biases towards like sport and not wanting to engage in watching men's sport. And that's the reason why, like you said, you went into Wembley and it's sold out and women are selling out games at clubs that the men don't sell out games. Because what you're doing is, if you bring men as a fan base, they'll be like, oh, it's football, I'll go watch football. But then you also get all of the women. And so you're tapping into the other 50% of the population that you don't get anything from right now. And so if you can tap into the other 50% of the population, the men's side probably gets more attendances because women are like, oh, I watch football and I watch women play football. Yeah. Maybe I'll go watch men play football. And so you get more revenue on the sport that you want to invest. Yeah. That you're like originally investing in. And then you're also getting those customers going over to the other side. And so you're filling your bank with 100% rather than 50% and dividing and excluding another one.
I think we've also got to remember that it's not a surprise. We know that the generation below us are different to even us as millennials, right?
Yeah.
Even and below that again and below that again. And I don't know if they will tolerate the same level of hooliganism as we go, oh, it's just men playing football. And it's a way to connect a younger population as well to sport. Yeah. And I think coming through the ranks is they're going to be more inclined to share their viewership. You know, if they had a vote for where they would give it, they'd give it to everyone versus I'm only this way and I like this. I think they're growing up with a very different mindset than we are. It's a very long game because they're children and they don't have money, and they'll be doing national service soon. So
let's not talk about it.
But that is again another market that is untapped in terms. If you're looking purely from financial, it's just like all these people. Do you want them to like sport again? And I'll be honest, how many children go to men's football games is a good example. Rugby's a lot better. They're a lot more kind and it's gentlemanly.
Yeah.
It's not family friendly for men's football. No. You go to the women's game and it is filled with families.
Yeah. I mean, football. What's the old one? Football is a
gentleman's sport played by hooligans, and rugby is a hooligans game played by gentlemen.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Is that the right way around?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I think so. I'll switch it if not.
You can sit in a rugby match and be sat with the away team.
Yeah.
And it just be like
banter. But that's what we mean. Like rugby is like you watch rugby as a sport and you think, God, you've got to be like a ridiculous type of human to play that. But every single rugby player is like, yes, sir, sorry, sir, okay, sir.
Shake hands.
And then in football, the sport where you're like, oh, they're passing a ball around and they're not like, shoulder charging people in the face. They're like, fuck you, ref. Why? No, that's not fair. I'm going to cry. All that, do you know what I mean? So I think that's where that phrase comes from. And like you say, that then translates into the stands and it gives those people a license to be like that. Like, my wife's dad went to watch a football match at Chelsea, right? And he's a Liverpool fan. His son's a Chelsea fan, so he went with his son because he wanted to go with his son and watch a football match. He had to leave at half-time because someone else in the same stand, the Chelsea fans had figured out he was a Liverpool fan and were like abusing him, pushing him, shouting at him. And he was just like, I don't feel safe. I've got to go home. And like you say, if you got rid of that, you'd be able to bring more kids in, more women would feel comfortable coming into the stadiums. More shirt sales, everything.
Yeah. So realistically, everyone should just start funding women's sport. The state should start funding women's sport. Businesses should start funding women's sport.
Yeah. Well, start watching women's sport. I think
we should start watching women's sport. Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. But like the fact it's all on the BBC. The fact the BBC is doing such a good job of actually getting women's sport on the BBC, is a really good thing because actually that is one way that the state can start to ensure that we elevate that sport and we elevate
more people watching it. You get more viewership. Then when it goes to other terrestrial TV, there'll be more ads, there'll be more sponsorship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's more exposure for the athletes, so then they can get brand deals, they can get sponsorship deals. I mean, like that is done really well by the women's Lionesses, the football team. They've been the first group of women's footballers to come through and say, we're going to go all over TikTok. And we're going to appear on podcasts and talk about women's sport. Yeah. We're going to bring out T-shirts that say "Put women's sport on TV." That's only happening because people are watching them, so they have a platform.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like if you just go, although there's less money in women's sport right now, if loads of people just decided they're going to go and watch it, then it would stop being the long-term option and it would start being the short-term option for companies, because they would be like, well, we can't make the argument that no one watches it anymore because loads of people are watching it. So then we have to put money into it because we're trying to capitalize on the sales. So if you're going to do one thing, in my mind, to like boost women's sport, just watch it. Just like tune in, like actually engage with it as it is now.
So go watch the women's basketball because they've had their funding cut.
Yeah.
And that's a sad situation where they've made investment. They've actually brought in talent.
They've been successful.
They've
got all the success they could have
achieved the goal. And instead of riding on the coattails of that success and then turning it into, a multiple revenue streams and keep investing in it and keep being the best. It doesn't happen from 1 year of winning. It happens from multiple years. Maybe they're just a crap company, you don't have enough money to invest in anything. But yeah, I guess we have to watch women's basketball. But it pains me that there's only one sport I've only mentioned about, which is women's football, because it's the only one that's really televised properly.
Yeah.
And that there's so many that
women's tennis.
Women's tennis. They're doing loads of great things actually in terms of trying to level the playing field.
They've done loads of great things for years. Like they've potentially gone. I always feel like it's a bit of a weird one where they should make the women's game an equal number of sets to the men's game. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the one argument, and it's a stupid argument.
There's 3 and 5 now, isn't there?
Yeah. So normally, it's best of 3 in the women's game, just all the way through the tournament. But the men's game is best of 5. But in the earlier rounds now, they've started to make it best of 3. And that's like one of the arguments that's always given against the idea that men and women should be paid equally by people that disagree. It's like, oh well, they're on for 5 sets and they're only on for 3 sets. Why should they get paid the same? And like, obviously, the stuff that happens in tournament is nothing in comparison to the amount of work that goes on outside of tournaments in terms of the amount of training that goes in.
It's 2 extra sets.
Yeah. But it just seems odd that they haven't changed that as a
dude. It's because it's run by old white men
who still think that people's wombs are going to fall out if they run around for an extra 2 sets.
But like even beyond that, they're just looking at it going, no, this is the way we've always done things. We're not going to change it just because you millennials want us to be more inclusive.
Oh my god, it feels like I've met you before. I think their argument probably with that, and I am assuming, is they'll say, well, men are more powerful, they have more endurance, they can do 5 sets, women can't, because producing that force output for that long is not possible.
And that might have been true way back in the day.
Yes.
Before the investment was made on the women's side.
Well, basketball, they used to have 9 players on a court.
The women's game?
Yeah, in America.
And
it was more like netball, and you could do like 3 dribbles and then pass it. And the reason that was brought in was because of the concern around the fragility of women. And I think this was in the early 1900s that basketball was played by women in America, obviously not here.
Yeah.
And it was brought kind of accidentally in. Yeah, because that was Victorian times and women had to run a household, they definitely didn't work, and there was all the stereotypes and things like that, and the dresses that they had to wear as well. Like you had to wear dresses down by your ankles, and that's true of football as well, which is ridiculous.
Try running that.
Yeah, try running that. The then concern would be, and I was reading up on this, and I didn't want you to bamboozle me with loads of basketball, which is why I sound like an expert. I'm not. Wikipedia's great. They then had to look at ways that it wouldn't add additional stress to them. So they were generally concerned that they would suffer from being too nervous and anxious off the back of trying to fit this into their life. So they changed the game.
Ridiculous.
To reduce the stress of it.
Do you know what the funny thing is as well? Is if you did increase the women's game to 5 sets, you'd probably get like way more interesting tournaments.
Yeah.
Because if a game's over after 3, you just got to win 2.
Well, there's no comebacks. If you watch like men's games now that are over 3 sets, it's so much more boring.
Oh, yeah.
There's no opportunity for like a player to come back from like a 1 set deficit. Like it's so hard.
Mate, one of the greatest tennis matches I ever watched was like Andy Murray was like 3 sets down.
Well, 2 sets down. If he was 3 sets down,
2 sets down. But yeah, 2 sets. So 2 sets down, and you're like, what's going on? And then you come back to like 2 sets all and you're like, is he going to do it? Oh my God, I've been watching tennis for like 4 hours, but I don't care.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It makes the game good, right?
Yeah, it makes the game so much more exciting.
To make something have more viewership, it needs to be watchable.
Yeah.
Like, this is why cricket's doing so well lately, because they've come up with a 100 format, which is better to watch than Test cricket.
I still don't understand it.
Yeah, no, me neither. No, my friend plays in it. Sorry.
So it just means that you get 100 balls.
Yes, something like that. But there is still like
they shorten the overs, and you get 100 balls, and you only have you have a limit on how many overs each bowler can bowl.
Okay, nice.
So like I think you get limited to like 3 overs per bowler, so you have to like think a little bit more about who you put into the attack.
This is the reason I don't understand cricket, is because you started speaking about over, and I literally zoned out. I was like, I just want to hit a ball. That was when I played cricket. It was like, someone throw a ball at me, and I'll hit it as hard as I can. And then
it's not squash.
No.
So what you want is rounders.
That's what you want to play. I love rounders. Rounders is an excellent sport. It can be played by anybody.
While we're trying to get everyone to watch sport, let's just get everyone to play more rounders.
Yeah, rounders is excellent. It's a great sport.
And again, many different skill sets.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean,
is that a good place to leave it? I
feel like that's everyone should take up rounders. Everyone should watch women's sport. The government should invest in women's sport. Businesses should start putting more money into women's sport to make more profit.
And girls go and do sport.
Everyone do sport.
Like, the amount of people who associate, and there's a sport for everyone. I think that's the main thing I would say is, you just haven't found what you enjoy, because the brain is built to enjoy movement, right? That's the entire system, how it all works. You get good feedback from doing exercise, so I don't think that anyone doesn't enjoy movement. They just don't know what it looks like for them.
I mean, I know we said we finished, but Imi, my wife, told me for years, she was like, I don't like exercise, I don't like sport. I got her to come to the gym with me when I was working in classes and things like that, and like she started to enjoy it, but she was like, I'm not too, this feels like too much effort. She started dancing, and she's been dancing 3 times a week.
Wow.
For a year.
She had a show.
She did a show
last week.
and like she loves it now.
To go.
We weren't allowed to go. I know. We had to
Matt organised for us to have pizza and play.
In fairness, she didn't want to like have the pressure of me being there the first time that she danced on stage, because she'd be thinking too much about like, am I doing the right thing? Is it all right? She wanted to just, all the girls that she danced with are the only ones that are watching. So it's just like everyone you dance around week on week. But either way, my point is, she was never someone that enjoyed exercise, and she has now gone from someone that never enjoyed exercise to, I want to do this
and perform
every week, and I want to like go and perform.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's what I was saying to her for years. I was like, babe, just try different things, get out there, do it. If you don't like it, don't stick with it. And then she found the dance, and she was like, this is amazing. I want to do this.
And there's women out there that don't play sports that they would have if they were. So for example, there's women who've never tried rugby.
Yeah.
And there's women who've never tried football. And I play for a casual league now. I don't, 'cause I've got a bad knee, but Bristol Casual League is purely designed to bring in women who want to play and be introduced to football. And this is what's great about it, is every 3 weeks, so that they understand that you have families and a job and a life. And you come and you play, and you get to meet a lot of different people. And some people, most people who join that are in their 30s who've never touched a ball in their life. So yes, there might be these other types of exercise like dancing that you've never tried, but also equally there might be all these sports that have always been available to you, but you've just felt like they're just for men.
Yeah.
To just give it a go. And that's where the grassroots comes in, and it doesn't have to be now just for kids. Grassroots can be our age joining something. I mean, you're going to be living for a very long time. Yeah. Hopefully.
And you'll live for longer if you play sport.
And you should live, unless your womb falls out.
And then what will you do? You won't be able to have any children.
Yeah.
We've just ended the human race.
Damn you! Why didn't we listen? Wombs everywhere.
Yeah. Just these brittle bones smashed to pieces.
And on that note,
let's
wrap it up.
Lovely. Thanks for coming on, Em.
Thanks for having me. I thought I would have to fight more for the women's corner, but I think part of the conversation is having men involved in it, and I think that's what you guys bring, and that's why we get on so well.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
All right. See you next week.
See you next week.